She died 13 years ago. And for most of that time, the world thought it knew her whole story. But it didn't, because just before she passed, a secret that had been buried for over 50 years finally came out. And it didn't come from a journalist. It didn't come from a biographer. It came from her own daughter, a daughter almost nobody knew existed. If you think you know Karen Black, stay with me, because what you're about to hear isn't in her Wikipedia page. It isn't in her obituaries. It's something her own family kept quiet for half a century. Karen Black was one of the defining faces of 1972 Hollywood. Easy Rider, 5 Easy Pieces, Nashville. She worked with Jack Nicholson, with Alfred Hitchcock, with Robert Altman. She was nominated for an Academy Award. She won 2 Golden Globes. She was, by every public measure, one of the most recognizable actresses of her generation. She played waitresses and outsiders and women on the edge, and somehow made every single one of them unforgettable. Later in her career, she leaned into horror, becoming something of a cult icon for an entirely new generation of fans who had no idea about the dramatic roles that made her famous in the first place. 2 very different careers, 2 very different audiences. And underneath both of them, one story she never told either one. But before any of that, before the fame, before the awards, before her name was in lights, she was a teenager with a secret so heavy it would follow her for the rest of her life. Here's what almost nobody knew. Long before Hollywood, a young Karen Black, still going by her birth name, was a student at Northwestern University. She was barely out of her teens. And during that time, she became pregnant. This wasn't the version of her story anyone got to see. There was no press conference, no public statement, just a young woman facing an impossible decision, completely alone. On March 4, 1959, she gave birth to a daughter, and then she made a choice that would haunt her in silence for the next 5 decades. She gave the baby up for adoption. Think about that for a second. A woman who would go on to become one of the most talked about actresses in America was carrying a secret that not even her closest fans, not even most of her own extended family, knew about. And no interviewer ever asked her about it, because no interviewer ever knew to ask. Decades of press junkets, decades of profiles and retrospectives, and this single fact never once made it into print. Not because reporters missed it. Because it simply wasn't there to find. The baby was adopted by a couple named Don and Joan Coleman. They named her Diane. And Diane grew up in Westchester, Illinois with no idea, at first, that her biological mother was a rising star of American cinema. Diane knew she was adopted from the time she was 4 years old. Her adoptive father told her gently, the way parents often do. But what he couldn't tell her, because he didn't know, was who her birth mother actually was. For years, that question sat unanswered. Illinois had sealed adoption records. The trail was, for all practical purposes, closed forever. Diane grew up. She married. She had 3 sons of her own. She built an entire life without knowing where half of it came from. And here's something worth sitting with. This wasn't a woman obsessing over the mystery every single day. This was a quiet ache in the background of an otherwise full life, a question she carried with her to birthday parties, to her own children's milestones, to ordinary Tuesday afternoons. The kind of unanswered question that never goes away, it just goes quiet. But here's where the story turns. In 2011, something changed. Illinois unsealed its adoption records. And for Diane, this wasn't just paperwork. This was the first real chance, in over 50 years, to finally see the name on her birth certificate. She sent away for it almost immediately, and when it arrived, she opened the envelope with her hands shaking, because whatever name was written on that page was about to answer a question she had been asking her entire life. The name staring back at her was Karen Black. Diane didn't fully believe it at first. This was one of those moments where your brain refuses to catch up with what your eyes are telling you. So she did what anyone would do. She searched the name, and Karen Black's Wikipedia page came up instantly. The timeline lined up. The age lined up. Even the resemblance, when she looked closely at old photos, lined up. Her birth mother wasn't just some anonymous name from a sealed file. Her birth mother was a famous actress who had been on movie screens her entire life, and Diane had never known. So she did the only thing she could think to do. She sent a message through Karen Black's fan page on Facebook. Now picture this from Karen's side for a moment. She's in her 70s. She's already fighting something most people didn't know about yet, a serious cancer diagnosis that had already cost her part of her pancreas. And into the middle of all of that, a message arrives from someone claiming to be the daughter she gave up more than 50 years earlier. Every second before that reply must have felt endless. A message like that doesn't just sit in an inbox. It sits in your chest. On August 7, 2012, Karen responded. She confirmed it. The daughter she had never spoken about publicly, the child she had carried as a teenager and then given away, was real, and she was reaching out. Here's the detail that makes this even harder to process. Karen had only revealed this secret to her own family a few months before Diane's message arrived. In other words, the timing was almost impossible. Just as Karen was finally starting to open up about the daughter she'd hidden for decades, that very daughter found her completely on her own, with no knowledge that Karen had said anything at all. To women, one secret. 53 years of silence. And it all collapsed in the exact same window of time, from two completely different directions. If you don't believe in timing, this story might change your mind. Neither of them planned it this way. Karen didn't know Diane was searching. Diane didn't know Karen had just confessed the truth to her family. And yet somehow, within the same handful of months, both sides of this 53-year-old secret were moving toward the exact same reunion. Completely blind to what the other was doing, Karen Black was also quietly battling cancer during all of this. She had been diagnosed near the end of 2010. It was ampullary cancer, aggressive, difficult, the kind of diagnosis that changes how someone counts the time they have left. And now, in the middle of that fight, she wasn't just an actress anymore. She was a mother meeting her daughter for the first time in 53 years. They built a relationship in the time that was left. Diane got to meet her biological siblings within that same week. She got to understand where parts of herself had come from: her face, her mannerisms, pieces of a puzzle she had been missing her entire life. All at once, an entire branch of her family tree that had been blank for 53 years filled itself in. But there wasn't much time. Every visit mattered more because of that. Every phone call carried the weight of knowing it might not last. This wasn't a reunion with the luxury of endless tomorrows. It was a race against a clock that had already started long before Diane ever hit send on that Facebook message on August 8, 2013. Almost exactly 1 year after that first message on Facebook, Karen Black passed away. 1 year. That's all they had. 1 year to build in real life what 53 years of silence had taken away. For a long time after that, Diane kept this story mostly to herself. It wasn't something she rushed to tell the world. This wasn't a tabloid moment for her. This was her mother, but eventually, she decided to put it into words. She wrote a memoir about the entire experience finding her birth mother, the joy of that reunion, and the grief of losing her almost as quickly as she'd found her. The book is called Finding Karen Black: Roots Become Wings. In it, Diane doesn't just tell the story of meeting a Hollywood star. She tells the story of what it feels like to spend your whole life feeling like you don't fully belong anywhere, and then, finally, finding the missing piece. She's described it as feeling like an island cut off from the rest of humanity for most of her life. And then, in one Facebook message, that island was suddenly connected to a mainland she never knew existed. That's the part of this story that goes beyond Hollywood entirely. Strip away the fame, strip away the movies, and what's left is something almost everyone can recognize in some form: the fear of not belonging, and the overwhelming relief of finally being seen by someone who shares your blood. Karen Black once said that giving up her daughter was the hardest thing she ever did. Not the film roles, not the horror movies she became famous for later in her career, not even facing her own diagnosis. The hardest thing was a decision she made as a scared teenager, one that she carried in silence for over 5 decades, And when it finally came out, it wasn't a tabloid exposing a secret. It wasn't a scandal. It was a mother and a daughter finding each other in the very last year they had. So the next time someone tells you they know everything about a celebrity's life, remember Karen Black. Remember that even the most documented, most publicly analyzed lives can hold a secret that stays buried for 53 years. Remember that sometimes the biggest stories aren't the ones splash across headlines.